Marcus Webb was 37 years old the morning he watched a woman return $80,000 in cash to a man she had never met, and understood in that quiet moment that he had been looking for the wrong thing his entire life. He was standing at the window of his penthouse on the 14th floor of the Meridian Tower in Charlotte, coffee in hand, watching the parking lot below the way he always did on Tuesday mornings. Not because he was a man who watched parking lots, but because the parking lot was attached to the community center his grandmother had helped build in 1987. And there were some places a man did not stop paying attention to. The woman below was small, dressed in nurse's scrubs, carrying a gray canvas duffel bag that looked too heavy for her frame. She walked straight up to the security booth and asked to speak to the building manager. He watched her hand over the bag. He watched the manager open it and step back. He watched her sign a form and walk away without looking over her shoulder. No cameras, no press, no one watching, or so she thought. He had her name within 20 minutes. Celeste Marion, 34 years old, single mother, licensed practical nurse at Carolinas Medical, 2 daughters, a Honda Accord with 190,000 miles on it. She had found the bag wedged behind a dumpster on Beatty's Ford Road while walking home from a double shift at 4 in the morning. She had counted the money. She had gone home. She had gone to work. And then, 12 hours later, she had brought it back. He had not built $40 million across real estate, logistics infrastructure, and community development contracts by ignoring the kind of person Celeste Marion turned out to be. What he did not know then, standing at that window, was that the decision to learn her name would remake his entire life, that the next 6 months would disassemble everything he thought he wanted and rebuild it from a different foundation. That a woman who did not know he existed would become the only person in years who made him feel like his grandmother's voice was still in the room. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light was good on the 14th floor. It came in from the east and settled across the bamboo floors in long, even panels. And Marcus Webb appreciated good light, the way a man appreciates anything he has learned to see properly. He had renovated the penthouse himself, not entirely himself. He had contractors, but he had specified every detail, selected every material, run his hand along every surface before it went in. The kitchen countertops were honed black granite. He had chosen them over the polished version because polished granite showed every fingerprint, and Marcus was not a man who liked to see the evidence of his own hands in the things he built. His grandmother had told him once, standing in her kitchen in Gastonia while she pressed cornbread into a cast-iron skillet, that a man who builds for the pleasure of being seen building has already missed the point. He had been 14 years old and had not fully understood it. By 30, he had understood it completely. He was a logistics infrastructure developer by profession, the kind of man who looked at the movement of goods through a city the way a surgeon looked at the movement of blood through a body. He identified blockages, inefficiencies, broken arteries. He redesigned the routes. He rebuilt the nodes. He had made his first serious money at 29 by quietly acquiring 3 underperforming freight staging facilities near I-85 and converting them into last-mile distribution hubs that 3 major retailers now paid handsomely to operate inside. The money had been good. The money after that had been better. He did not talk about it. He drove a 4-year-old black Ford F-150 that he serviced himself on weekends in the parking garage. His accountant, a woman named Phyllis Okafor, who had been doing his books for 8 years, had once told him that he was the only person she knew who actively tried to look worth less than he was. He did not have a wife. He had been engaged once, at 32, to a woman named Renata, who had been brilliant and beautiful, and had spent 14 months slowly redecorating his life without asking. He had not been angry when he ended it. He had simply looked around one morning at all the things that were no longer his and understood that the relationship was over. He had moved out of his own apartment and spent 4 months in a hotel while he found a different property. That was the kind of man he was. His grandmother, Idella Webb, had died 3 years prior at 81 in the same house in Gastonia she had lived in for 47 years. She had never moved to Charlotte. She had never accepted his offer to set her up somewhere nicer, somewhere easier. She had told him that her roots were in that house's floor and that a woman who let her roots be transplanted deserved to die without them. He still drove out there twice a year to maintain the property. He had not sold it. He had not decided what to do with it. He suspected he never would. He had been watching the community center for 2 years from the 14th floor. Not every morning, but most mornings. It had been one of Idella's projects. She had helped raise $220,000 in community donations in the mid-1980s to build a youth programming space on a block that badly needed one. The center had been struggling financially for the past 3 years. Marcus had been quietly funding its operating budget through an anonymous donor account managed by Phyllis. He had not told anyone. He was not planning to. Some things a man did not build for the credit. He found himself thinking about Celeste Marion at noon. He found himself thinking about her again at 3. By the time his driver, Antoine, dropped him at the Meridian Tower garage at 7 that evening, he had made a decision he could not entirely justify with logic, which was unusual for him, and which he therefore paid careful attention to. He was not an impulsive man. He had built his first facility deal on 3 months of prior research. He had never entered a partnership, a contract, or a negotiation without understanding, in advance, the weight-bearing capacity of every element involved. His grandmother had not called this caution. She had called it respect. For the structure, for the people inside it, for the possibility of failure, and what failure costs when it falls on more than just yourself. He had carried that word with him the way a builder carries a level, quietly, constantly. Not because the job required it in any particular moment, but because the habit of checking was the thing that kept everything true. That evening, he sat at the kitchen island in the penthouse and did not turn on the television and did not open his laptop. He drank 1 glass of water. He looked at the parking lot. The community center lights went dark at 9:15. Real power operated in quiet rooms. He had Phyllis pull what was available through public records and professional licensing databases. She called him back in 40 minutes. Celeste Marion had graduated from nursing school at 31. Having worked nights at a Waffle House for 3 years to pay tuition, while raising her daughters largely alone. The father of the older daughter had been in and out. The father of the younger had been mostly out. She had been promoted to shift lead at Carolinas Medical 18 months ago. She had one outstanding medical bill from a hospitalization the prior year. Her younger daughter, an asthma event that had required 2 nights of observation. The bill was $3,400. It was 11 months past due. She had been making payments of $40 a month. Marcus sat with that number for a long time. He thought about $40 a month against $3,400. He thought about what it looked like from the inside of that arithmetic. The specific discipline required to keep making $40 payments on a bill that was never going to disappear at that rate. To show up at the hospital accounting office and hand over $40 with the knowledge that the number on the screen would barely move. He had grown up watching his grandmother do versions of this math, and he knew what it required. It required the decision, made fresh each month, not to give up. He understood something about Celeste Marion then that went beyond the duffel bag. She had not returned the money because $80,000 meant nothing to her. She had returned it because she had decided, somewhere in the years that had made her who she was, that the version of herself that kept the money was not a version she was willing to live inside. That was not a financial calculation. That was character. That was the kind of architecture that did not show from the outside, and did not require an audience, and did not erode under pressure. He had not met many people like that. He was fairly certain he was looking at one now, through the reflection in a dark penthouse window. The $80,000 in the duffel bag, he had already confirmed through a quiet inquiry to a detective he occasionally used for due diligence, belonged to a man named Gerald Prentice, a mid-tier real estate investor who had been carrying the cash to an off-the-books transaction and had dropped the bag while loading equipment at his job site 2 blocks away. Gerald Prentice had not gone to the police. Gerald Prentice had simply been preparing to accept that the money was gone. When the community center manager called him on Tuesday afternoon, Gerald Prentice had wept on the phone. Celeste had left no contact information. She had not asked for a reward. She had simply said she worked in the neighborhood and had found it while walking to her car. Marcus opened a folder on his desktop. He labeled it simply, Beatty's Ford. He was not a romantic man. He would have said so himself, clearly if asked. He was methodical. He was deliberate. He had learned from 15 years of building logistics infrastructure that the most critical variable in any system was not the technology or the capital. It was the character of the people operating it. A warehouse with excellent systems and poor people failed. A warehouse with modest systems and excellent people outperformed projections consistently. He had made a great deal of money on this observation. He had applied it to almost every decision in his professional life. He had, until now, never thought to apply it to his personal one. He called Phyllis at 8 o'clock. She listened without interrupting. She had been his accountant, and in most of the ways that mattered, his closest counsel for 8 years. She had watched him build the business and manage the money and keep the community center funded in the dark, and she had never once told him what to do with any of it. She understood that her role was to present the structure clearly and let him decide what to put inside it. He had always trusted that instinct in her. He trusted it now. She did not say anything for several seconds. Then she said, "You want to find a reason to meet her that isn't strange." "Yes. That's going to require some engineering. That's what I do." Phyllis was quiet again. Then, the community center has a board meeting Thursday. They're discussing whether to launch a workforce development program, LPN training, CNA certification. Community health focus. You've been funding them anonymously. You could choose to stop being anonymous about one initiative. Marcus looked out the window at the parking lot below. That would put me in the same room as someone from the neighborhood health community. It might, Phyllis said, and he could hear in her voice that she had already thought this through and was merely waiting for him to reach the same place. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "What do you think of it?" It was not a question in tone, but it was a question in meaning. Phyllis understood the difference. "I think," she said carefully, "that you have spent a significant number of years building things for everyone except yourself. I think this is the first time in as long as I've known you that you've called me at 8 o'clock at night about something that wasn't a contract." He did not respond. "I think you should go to the meeting," she said. He drove himself to the Thursday meeting in the F-150. He wore dark slacks and a gray pullover. He sat in the back. The board presented the workforce development proposal. He listened to 3 presentations before Celeste Marion walked in 12 minutes late, still in her scrubs, still carrying a tote bag that looked like it held half her life in it. She sat 2 rows ahead of him and took notes on a yellow legal pad with a pen that was running low on ink. He watched her turn it upside down twice to coax more out of it. After the meeting, When people were gathering near the refreshment table, she stood near the exit going through her notes. He crossed the room and stood beside her. He said, "I noticed your pen was struggling." She looked up. She assessed him in about 4 seconds, the way people who work night shifts in hospitals learn to assess situations quickly. "I've got another one in the bag somewhere." "I have one," he said, and handed her a ballpoint from his pocket. She looked at the pen. It was a good pen, a Pilot G2, nothing extravagant. She took it. "Thank you." "You're involved in the LPN pipeline program?" "I'm a shift lead at Carolinas Medical. I've been trying to get them to partner with a community center for 2 years." He said, "I think it's going to happen." She looked at him again with that assessment look. "You know something about this project?" "I'm involved with the building," he said, which was true in the most minimal possible interpretation. Her name was Celeste Marion, and she was not impressed with him, which impressed him enormously. He drove home and sat in the kitchen for an hour without turning on any lights. His grandmother's voice, the one that lived in the part of his brain that had been shaped by Gastonian front porch conversations and cast iron skillets, said something that he did not try to put into words. It was more of a warmth than a sentence. He understood it anyway. 3 weeks passed like good weather. He did not move fast. He was not built for moving fast in the ways that mattered. He attended 2 more board meetings. He disclosed, quietly, that he had been the anonymous donor behind the operating budget for the past 2 years. The board chair, a woman named Thomasina Price, who had known Idella Webb personally, had sat back in her chair and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Her expression was the expression of a person who has suspected something for a long time and is now in the unusual position of being confirmed correct. She had looked at him and then looked at the wall, where a framed photograph of the center's founding committee hung. Idella in the second row, young then, laughing at something off camera. And she had said, in a voice that carried the full weight of what she meant by it, that Idella Webb had been one of the finest people she had ever known. He had not expected that to feel like anything. It felt like something. Celeste was at the second meeting, too. Afterward, she had found him near the parking lot. "Thomasina told me," she said. "All right. Why anonymous?" He thought about how to answer that. He said, "My grandmother helped build this center. It wasn't mine to take credit for." Celeste looked at the building. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother brought my sister and me here for after-school programs when I was 9. I didn't know it might close until 6 months ago. It's not going to close." She looked at him again with the assessing look. "Because of you. Because of a lot of people," he said. "My grandmother got here first. By the end of the month, they had had coffee twice and 1 dinner at a West Charlotte restaurant where the owner knew Marcus by name, and the food was the kind of food that did not try to be anything other than what it was. Celeste had ordered the catfish and a glass of sweet tea and had eaten without ceremony and had not once looked at her phone, which he noticed because it was rare. People who worked overnight shifts in hospitals developed a specific relationship with alertness. They did not waste it on things that did not require it. He understood this without asking. He had always found that the people worth knowing were the people who had learned through difficulty exactly how much they had to give and were therefore precise about where it went. She had asked him, directly, across the table, what he actually did for a living, because she had looked him up and could not quite make the pieces fit. She had found the F-150 and the community center connection and a brief mention in a Charlotte Business Journal article from 4 years ago about last-mile logistics innovation. But the pieces had not assembled into a clear picture. He told her the truth, all of it, the facilities, the contracts, the Meridian Tower, the $40 million. He did not soften it or delay it or frame it as a reveal. He just said it. She had been quiet for what felt like a full minute. Then she said, "And you're telling me this now because?" "Because I don't want to spend the next year pretending I'm someone I'm not." She had looked at him across the table, and he had looked back. The restaurant noise moved around them. She picked up her fork. "The pen you gave me at the meeting," she said. "I still have it. It was a good pen. It was a very ordinary pen," she said, "which is why I still have it." He understood what she meant. He understood it the way he understood the bamboo floors and the honed granite and the parking lot view from the 14th floor. Some things were not about what they cost. They were about the intention behind them. There was a conversation he needed to have with Phyllis before this went any further. Not about Celeste. Phyllis had already told him, without being asked, that she had no concerns about Celeste Marion's character, which from Phyllis was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. The conversation was about the $3,400 medical bill. He drove to Phyllis's office on a Thursday morning and sat across from her at her desk. "I want it paid," he said. "Anonymous, through the center's community health fund, if you can structure it." Phyllis did not look up from her keyboard. Already set it up 2 weeks ago. He looked at her. "You were going to ask eventually," she said. "The billing department at Carolinas Medical confirmed receipt yesterday. She'll get a zero balance notice next week." He sat back in the chair. "You could have told me. You could have asked earlier," Phyllis said. And there was nothing unkind in how she said it. He drove back to the Meridian Tower and stood at the window for a long time. Below, the parking lot was quiet. The community center's lights were on. A youth basketball program was running. He could see the orange glow through the side gymnasium windows. His grandmother had told him once that the problem with powerful men was not that they accumulated too much. It was that they forgot what the accumulation was supposed to be for. She had been talking about something else at the time, something about Gastonia City Council and a zoning dispute. But the way she said things, they had a way of meaning more than one thing at once. He thought about a woman walking home at 4 a.m. after a double shift, finding a bag with $80,000 in it, counting the money, going home, going back to work, and then, still tired, still in debt, still making $40 payments on a medical bill, walking the bag back to the building and signing a form and walking away. He thought about what it cost her to do that. Not morally. That part was simple for a woman like Celeste Marion, he suspected. The cost was in the arithmetic of need. You did not walk away from $80,000 unless you had a very clear understanding of what you were and what you were not. He had spent 15 years building systems that moved things efficiently from one place to another. He had been very good at it. He had made a great deal of money doing it. But standing at that window on a Thursday afternoon, he understood something that Phyllis probably could have told him years ago if he had been ready to hear it. The most important logistics problem he had never solved was figuring out what all of it was supposed to deliver, and to whom, and why. 6 months after that Tuesday morning, Marcus Webb was standing in the backyard of a house on Beatty's Ford Road. Not the house he had been standing in front of in his mind all those months, but a house 3 blocks from the community center that he had purchased quietly through a corporate entity and renovated over 4 months with the same deliberate attention he gave every structure he touched. Bamboo floors, honed granite, a deck off the back that he had built himself, board by board, on Saturday mornings while Celeste's daughters watched from the kitchen window and periodically brought him water. The yard had a Japanese maple he had planted in October. It was small still. It would take years to become the thing it was going to become. He had planted it anyway. Celeste was in the kitchen. He could hear the sound of her moving through the space he had built for no one in particular, and then, without planning it, had built for her. Her daughters Amara, who was 11, and Jocelyn, who was 7, were somewhere in the back of the house doing something loud. He did not mind loud. He had grown up in a loud house and had spent 15 years in quiet penthouses and had learned something important about which one left more in a man when the day was over. The community center's workforce development program had launched in September. 42 students enrolled in the first cohort. Celeste was on the curriculum advisory board. Marcus had donated the equipment and covered the first year of instructor costs through the Community Health Fund, and this time he had let his name be attached to it. Not for the credit, but because Thomasina had told him that a community needed to know who its builders were so they could hold them accountable. He had thought that was right. He had heard, through Gerald Prentice, who had heard through a mutual contact, that the story of Celeste returning the bag had made its way through the neighborhood with the particular velocity that true things traveled in close communities. Gerald Prentice had established a scholarship fund for the nursing program in the amount of $80,000. He had named it the Marion Fund. He had not asked Celeste's permission. She had found out when Thomasina told her at the October board meeting and had sat very still for a moment before she said, quietly, that she would not argue with it. Marcus had watched her from across the table when Thomasina said it. He had seen her face in that moment and had understood something about her that no amount of database research could have told him. She had not done it for the recognition. She had not done it expecting anything to follow. She had done it because she was the kind of person who did not know how to be any other way, and she was so accustomed to that not mattering that the moment it did was almost more than she knew what to do with. He walked out onto the deck. The morning was cool. Charlotte in November had a specific quality of light, low and gold, and not yet decided about the day. He held his coffee with both hands the way his grandmother had always held hers. Some systems, he thought, could not be designed in advance. You had to watch them operate first. You had to understand the load before you knew what kind of structure was required. He had built a great many things in his life. Some of them had been worth more than others. He was beginning to understand, for the first time in a long while, that he was standing in the middle of the one that mattered most. The maple tree caught a piece of morning light and held it briefly before the clouds moved. He was not a romantic man, but he was, at last, building right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.